Great. Well, welcome to our session today for our Time to Act Mental Health Echo. This is the last session in this series. We have a new one starting up in August. So if you want to register for that, it's the same link. It will just be a drop down with our network that starts in August of 2025. We are recording today's session. They are always, the recordings are always available on our Canvas page, as well as our YouTube channels, that you can go back and watch these again, share them with colleagues, families, friends, others that you think might be interested in what we are talking about. We do hope that ECHO is an interactive community. If you were at our session last month where Tyrell and Jett presented for us, you'll know that they had a lot of discussions via chat, coming off mute. So it's a great way to get our questions answered from really subject matter experts who are out in the field doing what we're doing. We also love case narratives. Case narratives are a great way to just get information from all the amazing people on this call, resources that you might not be familiar with, but they are, and the same thing. I can share the resources that I know with everybody out there as well. So if you're interested in doing a case presentation, please just reach out to us. We do talk about sensitive topics, so please just remember to protect individual privacy. If you have any questions about what that means, you can reach out to one of our amazing hub members. They have an asterisk in front of their name, and they'll be able to answer any questions. Key components of an ECHO session is we will always have a presenter or a subject matter expert, and then we'll go into case presentations where we will provide feedback, and that's where we can do some of our professional networking. So when Heather Mitchell shares something really wonderful and a great resource, you know that you can reach out to her. You can get her contact information and do some follow-up. And that's, again, just that way that we build that professional networking over Zoom. If we were all in person, we'd be chit-chatting and talking amongst each other and having those discussions. We all have been on Zoom for a minute, so if you've not known how to rename your profile, here is some instructions to do that. Again, that profile name just helps us know who's on the call, knows how to reach out and where you work at. Raising your hand, again, it's just right down there by your participants on Zoom, and you can raise your hand, or you can just come off mute or put it into chat. We'll make sure that those questions get answered. We'd love to have you pre-register for the session, so we make sure that we get the information out to you ahead of time. And you can email timetoact@aggies.usu.edu, and we will get you that information. We do ask that you complete a survey, and throughout today's session, it will be dropped into chat. That is how we then send out our certificate of attendance. And I just want to give a huge shout out to everyone who always completes those surveys for us. It is something that we can take back to our funders to let them know what is happening in these ECHO networks, as well as our reach, so we can continue to keep these free of charge. Canvas is where we store everything. So if you would like access to our Canvas page that has the PowerPoints, the case recommendations, any of that, you can reach out to timetoact@aggies.usu.edu, and we will get you a link to register for that page. Just another plug for case studies. They are a great way to use everybody on this call to get all the resources and valuable information on that. We do have a Facebook page or a Facebook group that you can continue those discussions after the session. It's just a way to keep that conversation going and sharing resources with all of us on the call. We have social media that if you've not followed us and you want to take a minute to follow us, we share things about our sessions, resources that we are shared with us from past presenters, information about current topics. So go ahead and follow us. And I'm going to stop sharing and turn the time over to Tyrell and Jett.
Perfect. Thank you, Janelle. I'm going to go ahead and screen share our presentation. Okay. Perfect. Let's. Okay. Can everybody see the screen okay? Are we good?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Well, you know us. We were here last month, but it's good to be here again. My name's Jet. I also go by Jaylee. Either is fine. And then my partner.
My name is Tyrell. We're very excited to be with you all again. And we're going to flick this upon you with all of our rainbows today, but happy Pride Month as well. So our topic today that we would like to focus on in light of it being Pride Month is the politics that affect the LGBTQ plus community and their loved ones, as well as why June is known as Pride Month and why this is a thing that may or may not be controversial and what we should do about that within the spaces that we work with.
Okay, and then kind of an overline of what we're going to cover today is like why Pride Month, like why do we have that? The how and the why of LGBTQ plus people's identity being political, current legal and political statuses, provider responsibility, intersectionality, and then we'll leave time for questions there at the end. Okay, so our first thing is why does Pride matter? And we're proposing this question to the group. Why does Pride matter?
I think pride is important because you're celebrating you're just kind of being inclusive and you're just celebrating people who have gone through a lot of struggles in the past. And I think it's just important to recognize like Pride Month because these people have not had some of the resources or they haven't had a lot of the opportunities that a lot of the heterosexual or like the heteronormative community has had. So I think Pride Month is just super important so we can recognize like, hey, let's be prideful of who we are. And like it's just like a good place to get a lot of resources for just LGBTQ specific resources and just form found family. So
Thank you, Leo.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anybody else want to chime in with why does Pride matter?
We also want this to be a safe space where you could also be like, I don't know. I honestly have a hard time with Pride Month. Like we want this to be an open space where you don't feel like you don't have a voice.
Well, I think for me, it's helped me learn the why, and learn about what people in the past have done to promote their safety and their inclusion into our society. So it's helped me understand the history.
Thank you, Stephanie. I also want to highlight Heather's comment in the chat. A few reasons that Heather shared out is community, connection, and belonging.
Absolutely. Does anybody else want to chime in about why Pride matters?
I'll chime in. I think it really challenges the idea that being queer is inherently negative or something to be ashamed of. Similar to disability pride, like this is just a normal variation in the human experience, and human beings are amazing in all ways. And this is just a recognition that this is not it's that countering the stigma that's been a part of the community for so many years in our particular culture. In other cultures, it's not stigmatized, right? So it's just a challenge to the stigma, I think.
Thank you, JC. We have a video that we want to share with you all in connection with this as well. While Jett is pulling that up, I want to bring attention to some policy that is in place in a few different states, Utah being included.
Sorry, Tyrell.
Okay. No, that's okay. I don't want to try and compete with this beautiful video. Recently, our legislators have passed policy that we should, in public or government-funded spaces, we shouldn't have any flags or banners of political nature. In particular, this would affect school settings, state or other government buildings, and spaces, maintaining a stance of neutrality. I want to bring that policy up as we watch this video, it's brief 2-minute video together, about why there may have been some pushback from members of the queer community to be like, this is actually harmful. It's not something that is neutral, it's erasure, and why that would feel painful. I want you to kind of keep that in mind as we also consider why pride might be something that is important. Do you want to go ahead and share that video for us? And I heard the audio. Everybody else heard the audio okay? I hope.
Okay.
Sweet.
Perfect. Well, go and press play.
Okay. We'll just kind of let that percolate. We'll continue forward with our presentation, but let that kind of simmer in your brain so we talk about policy and what to do as providers.
Okay, so the next one we're just going to kind of expand on a little bit of like, why did Pride Month become a thing? And so what I have listed on the screen is kind of the more modern history of why Pride Month, and here in America particularly, because once again, America is one country out of many countries who all have different societal standards and responses to the LGBTQ plus community. We can look back at one of the first examples of criminalizing LGBTQ plus people, particularly homosexual men, was when King Henry defined any non-procreative sex as a crime. And so that was probably one of the first instances that we see in history of that. And then as we continue from there going forward, we see across cultures different ways that queer people have been marginalized or yeah. So for the American recent history, the roots of Pride Month trace back to the Stonewall riots in 1969. Then following that, kind of another thing talking about flags, particularly the pride flag that we've come to know today was first popularized and used in 1978. Until then, it was a pink triangle. The pink triangle originates from the Holocaust time, where LGBTQ plus individuals were identified with an upside down pink triangle during that time. And then a little bit more into like the why Pride Month. It's a celebration of LGBTQ plus people's new right to peacefully gather, and that kind of ties back into that Stonewall riots. Is it's a new right for queer people to not be criminalized to gather and to celebrate who they love. And then the other part of this is the opposite of pride is shame, and being gay is not something to be ashamed of. So why Pride Month? It helps combat the shame and the stigma that is all throughout our society, unfortunately. So that was a really quick rundown of why Pride Month with some of the like highlights of the history and recent history. But I also wanted to open up this time if anybody had any other questions or like how did Pride Month come to be? How is it like now in 2025 versus when it first started in 1969? All of that. So does anybody have any questions about this and like why Pride Month? Or other points they would like to add to this?
So this is Janelle. One of the things that that video really struck me to say is that we all want to know people who look like us, have similar views, similar thoughts, you know, and we all get excited when that happens. And so it was just, that was really powerful.
Thank you, Janelle.
The other thing I'll add on here that I meant to mention earlier and I forgot to, but why Pride Month? Pride Month increases safety of the LGBTQ plus individuals around there. Since 1969, the ability for queer people to exist publicly has become a lot safer. Granted, there's still some safety concerns. I mean, we've all seen the news. So that's another part of Pride Month is it destigmatizes, therefore increases safety and understanding of people within this community. Okay. We welcome any other comments as we go through this presentation, but I will move on to the next slide unless you have anything you'd like to add, Tyrell.
I don't at this time, thanks. So Jett kind of touched on some of these points as well that I'll bring up here, but we have the LGBTQ plus community, which is a part of a person's identity, and the how and why of it being a political discourse. I would like to hope that at some point in time it is not a political discourse. To the most basic extent, the reason that there is political integration with the LGBTQ plus community is that we, as a country, I'm going to say, we're founded on the ideas of shared values. And those shared values have persisted, changed over time. And values are something that each of us are entitled to being able to explore for ourselves, to be able to hold dear. I love the movie Inside Out, where we talk about like the core little islands that people have, and those can kind of be founded as like these metaphorical value systems that we hold. Well, for some folks, one of the most powerful values they had was the sanctity of marriage between man and woman. And that could have come from religion, it could have come from personal experience, it could have come from a fear, potentially, of something that's other or unknown. When we integrate values into policy, we inherently are going to, I guess, experience conflict, where it's like, well, I don't agree with what you agree with, so therefore this is a right versus wrong, us versus them kind of situation. As providers in the mental health field, our responsibility is to examine and understand our values and never impose our value system on the populations that we serve. That is how our political system should operate as well. We talk about the separation of a church and a state. We are not a theocracy in the United States, we're a democracy. And while the majority has a shared value system, we want to get to that place where we're like, hey, we are able to see and value, respect one another's opinions and values, how you came to that point. Yet, the policy should not inherently be based on a value. That's my little soapbox for today. I hope there's not another one, but thanks for listening. I'm here all week for another hour. But when we talk about the evolution of legal rights, this is kind of where things came from. The United States, while democracy was like the patriotic movement for us, we also were definitely influenced by the pursuit of religious freedom and values, right? So legal rights have, as Jett mentioned in our last slide, well, no sex that was considered for the purpose of reproduction was okay. No recreational sex whatsoever. And if you have two individuals of the same sex, then any of their sexual relations are considered non-procreative. So they were criminalized. That's the word I was looking for.
I'm going to add just one little thing in right there as we're talking about it. The other part of this is sex for a long time was defined as having to have a man present for that. And so when two people who are assigned female at birth or two women were in a relationship, that was not considered or viewed as sexual for a lot of different points in history, because a man would have to be present for sex to be considered sex.
That's a point that, thanks, Jett, that I learned something. And I'm intrigued right now. Yeah. Another thing that I want to kind of draw attention to is this third bullet point here. The DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual for diagnosing or providing categorization of mental health conditions, experiences, something that is continually evolving and being refined in the mental health field. But in its first iterations for over 20 years, homosexuality was a mental health disorder. In the current, the DSM-5, the current iteration, we have what is known as gender dysphoria. Any clients that I work with who are transgender and seeking some form of gender-affirming surgery, they have to have a well-documented diagnosis of gender dysphoria, and then they have to receive multiple therapy sessions to validate that their experience is valid before they can receive a letter from me that says you're good to go and have a surgery to affirm your gender expression. I think that's very interesting in the context of these surgeries are required, or sorry, these letters and permission is required from a mental health provider. However, other forms of affirming body surgeries are acceptable within our society. Without it comes back to this value system. I want a tummy tuck, sweet. I want to go and ice my tummy so that I can have my rock hard abs and stuff, sweet. What's the research around it? Okay, well, we're not really worried about that. I want to look beautiful. I want to feel good in my skin. Let's do whatever. Plastic surgeons, we love them. However, if you're a transgender individual, there's something wrong with you. So that's something to keep in mind here, is the way that we quantify a mental illness versus societal values, once again. Jett, any thoughts that you want to add on here? I know that conversion therapy we're going to talk about in the next slide as well.
Yeah, the only thing that I'm going to add on there is gender affirming cares for cisgendered people too, like you were saying, which is when you provide care for yourself. In this context, we're talking about medical care, right? That affirms you and your gender identity. If you're a cis woman and for whatever reason, getting breast augmentation would make you feel more like a woman, that's gender affirming care for cisgendered people. It's typically, though, only scrutinized letters required, like Tyrell said, for trans individuals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So the next slide, we're talking about current legal and political statuses. Tyrell, do you want to kick this one off?
Yeah. So I'm going to admit that Jett and I had a conversation when we were working on our presentation, and the legal arena is constantly changing with this, and some things were just like, we got to keep up with this. I'm going to skip conversion therapy for just a second. We'll come back to it because this is how fast things are changing. We put up this, if you're not familiar with the Supreme Court hearing, the U.S. versus Scrimeti, I think is how it's pronounced. Under the Biden administration, a Tennessee judge's decision was appealed to the Supreme Court, and I hope that I'm using all of the legal jargon correctly. My dear professor JC is here, who did my policy class, so I'm hoping I'm not messing anything up. But the Supreme Court was going to look at this case and determine, are we going to uphold this this decision in the Tennessee court, which will set a precedent for a federal approach to care versus the state's rights to determine this. So specifically what we're looking at in the U.S. versus Scrimeti incident is gender affirming care for minors. As Jett mentioned earlier, gender affirming care is feeling more comfortable as your gender identity, being able to feel woman or man enough. In particular, with minors, those who are under the age of 18, this has come under scrutiny because it's like, hey, kids are kids. They kind of, are known for not really thinking too much, being impulsive. Like, let's look at the biological and psychological development of these teens. And a lot of states in the past few years have passed measures to keep safeguards in place for gender affirming care for minors. Okay. In the state of Utah in particular, the phrasing was, let's do some more research to make sure that this is so that we understand the science behind this, to know if this is something that the research backs that this is something that we could do. Until then, let's pause on what we're doing. Well, literally this morning when I woke up, I was getting ready for the day, and at 8:16 a.m. I get a notification on my phone. The Supreme Court okays Tennessee ban on gender affirming care for minors, which is a big loss for transgender rights. So literally this morning, we have an update to this case that we were planning to discuss. The Supreme Court says, yes, the states haven't violated any constitutional rights. We are in a space where it's okay for us to put a legal measure on what kind of care minors can and cannot access. So, current political status, it's ongoing. These are things that we have to be aware of on a regular basis with the clients that Jett and I work with. What this means is states keep going forward. Supreme Court says you're okay. We have to now navigate that with each of the clients that we work with, and in their unique situations. Jett mostly sees folks in Utah, and I see folks across the nation. So I have to kind of understand what each state's laws are with this. Jett, what kind of thoughts do you want to throw in?
I mean, I just want to echo a lot of the same that you had said. I don't know if I have any particularly unique thoughts.
Okay. I don't want to talk too much, but let's go on to another kind of thing that's of a legal measure. Conversion therapy. If you are not familiar with what conversion therapy is, this is a form of, I don't even want to call it psychotherapy because of my personal values, but I'm going to try and remain neutral. It is a form of therapy where the intent is for somebody to go through therapeutic practices in order to change their sexual orientation from an undesired to a desired one. Some of the criticisms of it is that it is rooted in shame, in values, again, which I've tried to highlight the values versus just kind of neutrality. And the research around it, kind of looking at the results, is that it does not work and that it is harmful. It creates more distress and psychological illness than the results that are desired from it. If you are curious and want to explore conversion therapy a little more, a really good book or film adaptation of that book is a film called Boy Erased, that goes through the process of what a conversion therapy potentially looks like and how it affects somebody. This is illegal in many states. I think that when I was looking at it most recently, I think 27 states have banned it because of the implications of the harmful results. However, it is still legal in almost half of our states for folks to be going through this process and trying to erase that as an identity. The third point here, this is something that is kind of, it's in conversation, and it's something to watch, to be very aware of. In 2015, the Supreme Court determined that people of any sexual orientation have the right to be married. That marriage is a right for all, not just heteronormative couples. That has been standing for about 10 years, was considered a great win for the LGBTQ plus movement and equal rights. Last week, I woke up again to another news notification. There was a huge call from religious and political groups alike to advocate to the Supreme Court to reconsider that decision. While the Supreme Court has not made comments to these calls for a revisitation, I'm going to just be very candid. I'm afraid for myself. My partner and I got engaged on Christmas Eve this last year. I'm so excited. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get married next year, if it's going to be legal for me. I don't know what it would look like if it's like, yes, let's just give it the power back to the states. Well, what does that mean if I get married in one state, but then I live in a state where it's not legal? I don't know how to navigate this kind of stuff, and I'm sure I could figure it out. But there's a lot of fear that something that I felt I could finally celebrate may now be taken away. And in particular, as I was researching it, there are in at least 9 states varied legal measures that are put into place to, if the Supreme Court will make movement with this, they're ready to start repealing any restricting this right for LGBTQ plus folks. Heather Waters, I noticed that you have the Department of Health and Human Services logo in your background. I know that this is also a very large department, so I don't want to call you out too much. But one thing that we know is that the Department of Health and Human Services for the state of Utah very recently, I think within the past 2 weeks, posted that study that I alluded to, where Utah was like, hey guys, let's put a pause on gender affirming care. Let's have the Utah Department of Health and Human Services do some research into this. Let's make sure that we're acting in good faith and good solid science. Well, that study was recently published. I have no idea, Heather. Do you have any comments with this? Do you want to say anything, or do you want to be like, nope, I'm not saying anything? And that's totally fine too.
So to be honest, we are a huge department, thousands and thousands of us. And I don't work with, the program that's doing any of this research. I'm so far removed from it. I work with infants and toddlers, birth to 3. Okay. I'm so sorry. So I am not to be asking this question.
That is perfectly okay.
I'm sorry.
No need to apologize. I love the work that you do for us. So thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks for letting me kind of call you out of the blue. You're like, oh no.
I wish I had something to contribute, but
yeah. The information that we do have from this study, and again, I don't have as close as a connection. I am not with the Department of Health and Human Services at all. But what we have seen from the results is that overwhelmingly, the study was looking at the implications, the effects of gender affirming care for minors. The question being asked, does gender affirming care for transgender youth, does letting them lean into their gender that may or may not be the same as assigned at birth, does allowing them to lean into that to get affirming services, is that healthy for them? Is that creating problems? How many of them regret these decisions and go back on it? Is it more helpful for them to receive these services as an early intervention at the onset of puberty? Or is it okay to let them go through the biological puberty and then once they turn 18, begin that process because their psyche has developed a bit more, the decision-making factors and so forth? These questions, overwhelmingly, the evidence came back and said gender affirming care for minors is helpful. There are low instances of regret. There are low risks associated with this. They presented this information to the Utah legislative bodies, and the responses that we have received from Governor Cox and others who have pushed for this kind of research is silence, ignoring this evidence that they requested. Somebody, I should have included this quote here. One legislator said, "This isn't grounded enough science," to paraphrase him. Yet this is a study that they requested themselves. To me, if this is not based then in values, what is this? Is it fear? It's something that we need to really critically examine. One of the last things here, and then Jett, I'll let you just go from here. One of the last things, passports, gender markers on passports right now. We have to tell our clients in our clinic, it's actually best if you don't legally change your gender, because you will be stopped trying to travel between states, between state lines and countries, because the US government within the past, oh goodness, we're in June already. So within this year, the US government has said legal gender markers are only male, and that is somebody who is born with a penis, and there is only female, and that is somebody who's born without a penis, and that is it. There are no other exceptions legally defined on your identity. And now, because you have a client who looks like a man, but their administrative sex says female on their passport, they are being detained and harassed in situations where they're just trying to travel. So this is why politics matters, why we need to understand and be engaged with the political process for our clients. All right, Jett, I think that's all I have to say, but I want to, if there are questions and so forth, we can spend some time on this.
The couple things I'm going to add in really quick right here is I looked this up just to make sure I had the right numbers before doing this. For gender affirming care, there's about a 1% regret rate, meaning that they didn't feel that that surgery was beneficial to them in whatever way. A lot of the time as well with detransitioning and regret, studies are showing it's much more societal pressure and stigma than personal choice. A lot of time people have to consider safety. And then for that regret rate of about 1% for gender affirming care, knee surgeries have about a 30% regret rate. So one of the biggest differences in that process, though, is that like with knee surgeries, right? People don't have to go to a psychotherapist and talk for hours and hours and hours and affirm that this is what they want to do and is a good choice for their body. People can just sign up for a knee surgery, get it replaced, and then may have regrets about that later. And so there are benefits to having like checks and balances with this. Personal opinion, I think it's maybe a little too restrictive sometimes, especially for our folks over the age of 18 in particular. But yeah, just some facts to throw out there too. And then the erasure of identities legally on passports, the one thing that they did not consider is when they defined how they defined gender, it was at conception, what gender you were assigned at conception. If you know anything about the development of human embryos, you do not have sex characteristics developed until later in that gestation in the pregnancy. So technically all embryos at conception are female because they do not have a penis at that point. So there's just legal definitions that are inaccurate, and then it does not take into account intersex, which, like we had talked about in our last presentation, is about as common as people with red hair. And so biologically, legally wise, their definition is just inaccurate as well. And then please feel free to anybody to chime in with any questions relating to this, but I'm going to just pop over to the next slide a little bit. Kind of ties into what we are talking about already. And so, yeah, I'm just gonna, does anybody have any questions, comments, things about that before we do move on with this presentation? I want to make sure we leave space for that. Okay. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Stephanie has raised a hand, yeah.
Sorry, I'm asking and making comments. So I do have a question, and maybe you don't know the answer, but in my sphere of like on my social media and things like that, I see all of these comments, which I know are not true, but about how teachers in classrooms are making children change without parent consent. And how are you guys combating that? Or is that not something you want to go into? You don't have to, but that seems to be a problem that I see like in my age demographic, and I just need some help understanding what the laws are so I can speak out honestly when I see those type of things. So I don't know if this is the time to ask that question, but
My first thoughts, and Tyrell, I want you to jump into is first and foremost, someone's sexuality or gender identity does not exclude them from being a bad person. Sometimes there are just people out there, regardless of how they identify, that are just doing negative and harmful things to children, to any people or persons. A lot of the time when we find comments like that, it could be taken out of context. Like they saw a news article taken out of context and they ran with it. I also find a lot of the time it's just like fear mongering. And so my personal approach to that would be like, oh my gosh, that sounds so terrifying. Can you link me to the news article that says this? Can you show me like actual evidence or proof that this is happening? And a lot of the times there's not, or there is questionable sources for their material, and like kind of point that out. I also find that a lot of the time, like if it's like on a Facebook comment section or Instagram comment section, it's not always the most helpful to fight back on some of these things because they're going to be very stuck in their opinion. So if you want to engage and provide accurate information, I think that's a really big help to the community, and there's allies and people like me to do that. But I also find that it is rage bait and meant to be make you angry and upset, and there's not a whole lot we can do with that, unfortunately. Tyrell, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I'll try and keep it brief. I agree with what Jett said, where some of this is designed to be inflammatory, rage bait. I had a client, I think that this was maybe about 7 months ago. I had a client who was, what is the school called? There was a middle school in Utah County where there was an article about how the kids had litter boxes in the bathroom because somebody identified as a cat, and somebody was interviewing these middle schoolers and going off about that. I had a client who was at that school and said, none of this is true. And it was like, okay, when we take stories that are designed to be inflammatory, I would be weirded out if I had a kid who was pissing in a litter box next to me while I'm washing my hands. That's weird. If they want to do that, let's figure out a way to do that isn't infringing on other people, right? I maybe I spoke out of turn. Maybe I shouldn't call it weird. That's judgmental of me. Look at me assigning my value system here. I was a teacher prior to becoming a therapist. Had I told any of my students, actually, I think you're not this gender. You need to explore this more and reinforce that. I would have been fired so fast. I think that I would have been stoned by the parents so fast. However, what I did do is if a student came to me and said, I use this name and these pronouns, I said, okay, I will use those. Until the school said, you can't do that without the parents' permission. And then I was like, I don't know what to do. And that's where policy, again, becomes very important, where we look at these issues and say, what is the most effective for helping somebody stay mentally safe, and operating within that rounds. That kind of goes to this first bullet point that's on this slide that talks about helping clients and evaluating your ethics versus legality of what is within your power. And that's a hard thing to navigate. I hope that helps.
Yeah, so Tyrell, I just have a question based on that comment you just made about the child in your classroom, that they want to be called a certain name. You want to respect that. Is that then something that educators should bring parents in on that conversation? Or is that then going against that they're coming out to certain people, but not other people? Like, how do you navigate that? Because that could seem like then a parent, if you're at a parent-teacher conference, it could be a tricky situation to navigate too.
Yes. So I'll try and contextualize it a little bit. So if a student asked me, hey, my name is Nathan. If you call me Nathan, I will punch you. I only go by Nate. None of us blink an eye. Or if like you're in my situation where my legal name is actually David, if you call me David, I will not respond to you. I have no idea who that person is. I use my middle name, which is Tyrell. There are tons of circumstances that are kind of like non-trans related, where people will use different names. Trans specifically, though, which is what I believe that you're asking about, it, or gender specifically, I should say. I have some clients that will just go by an initial that is the same initial as what their given name was until they come with a different name or when they share their pronouns and stuff with me. So that you're right. Kiddos feel like there are certain places where it's safe for them to be that gender, using these pronouns, using these names. When I was a teacher, there were no legal measures in place that said you can't do that. What I did with my students is I would ask, okay, what name do you use? What are your pronouns? I asked, are there any other things you want me to know about you? And then I would ask, are there situations where you want me to use this name versus don't want me to use this name? So this is something that's just my information to have? Or are there any situations where it would be unsafe for me to use this name or pronouns for you? That was casual for me to ask. It wasn't a big deal. I did it in just like my intro form for students, where I think that we would talk about favorite colors and like your subjects and so forth. I didn't run into any issues really. However, shortly after transitioning from teaching into social work, the school that I had been teaching at said, no names except for what is on the legal record unless you have parent permission. In a situation like that, what I would try and do is say, hey, here is the situation. I need to use the name that is on your record. If you have a nickname or usually go by something else, will you just let me know so that I can have a conversation with your parents? But then I try and have an individual conversation with the kiddo, so that way I'm able to work with them one-on-one. But when I would bring that up to the whole class, it's like, oh yeah, nicknames, this isn't a big deal. But I explained the situation. I want to provide safety, but I also still have to operate within what is policy at that point in time. But it's perfectly okay for me to say to the student, thank you for letting me know that your preferred name is Stacy instead of Steven. I won't be able to call you that, but I want you to recognize if there's ever a chance that we can have a conversation with your parents, I would love to start calling you Stacy. That way I can show my support while still and just being transparent with them. I hope, does that answer your question, Janelle?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's, tricky situations. So those are great responses. So thank you.
The only thing I'm going to add to that is we just need to make sure we're taking into account the safety of the individual. If bringing this up in a parent-teacher conference would jeopardize the safety of your students, I'm going to suggest that we don't do that. But also, like Tyrell said, you need to make sure you're following policy. So I'm going to go through the last couple things we have on here before we run out of time today. And so this kind of just really comes back to everything we've talked about so far, which is make sure like you're aware of the legality and the ethics of your profession in your particular environment that you're working with, and then the ways you can help clients legally. Part of the reason I keep saying legally is if we're doing stuff that aligns with our values that might not be legal and you get in trouble for that, that removes you as an individual within the system that is an affirming person. So I never want to suggest that you do something that would jeopardize your job or anything in any way, just because if you are an affirming person in that environment, let's make sure we can have you in that environment as long as possible. That's my personal thoughts on that one. Reminders, laws vary state by state. This can get really tricky for a lot of reasons, like Tyrell mentioned. It's really important that you as the provider can identify the steps that can be taken within your own environment and within your own state. There can be resources, and there are resources out there if you're looking for them, to help individuals receive transportation between states to maybe a state where gender affirming care is easier to access. or looking for new residents in those more affirming states for safety reasons as well. And then always as a provider, we can foster resilience. There might not be a lot of wiggle room on some of these things for many different reasons, but we can help the humans that we work with be resilient in the face of adversity. And then the next slide, I just wanted to touch briefly on intersectionality. We all here on the call today have multiple identities and multiple parts of us. Pride or the queer part is one part or one possible part of a person of a greater whole. Just because a person is queer doesn't mean that's the only thing about them. Oppression affects us all. When one group is marginalized or told that they can't do something, that very easily spreads to other groups. Minority stress, if you haven't heard of that, I encourage you to look into that. But the basic idea behind this is that people who are minorities here in America, because they're not able to access care or the resources in the same ways and they face discrimination, there's extra stress on there for them. Really brief of that. It's a really interesting topic that I really do encourage everyone to explore more. And then communities exist in solidarity. I wanted to highlight the intersectionality, particularly between disability and queer identities, which is love yourself, love your body. We want to have autonomy and choice over our experience. We can do a lot of parallels if we look at disability history to queer history. There's a lot of parallels of people's rights being restricted, them not being allowed to be seen in public, those kinds of things, very unfortunately. So intersectionality affects us all. All of us have an identity that we need to acknowledge and that we're proud of, hopefully. And so that's just one thing to pop in there. Tyrell, anything you want to add with that?
I could, but no. We'll have another one about intersectionality.
Perfect. Intersectionality really is such a huge topic, and I know I cannot do it justice in this like 2 minutes that I'm giving it. But this is a very, very important piece to all of this because it does affect us all. And then we wanted to leave the last little bit of time, if we still have time, for questions. We wanted to have a respectful dialogue on this topic, which we have. The political landscape is always evolving and changing, so let's talk about that and why it's always evolving and changing. And we don't always have to agree values-wise to understand that people should have autonomy over their own body. My body, my choice, another example of intersectionality between women's rights and LGBTQ plus rights, is everybody should have the choice to do what they would like with their own body, whether they regret that or not at the end. That's an entirely different conversation. Regret is separate from all of this, but people should have the right to choose, regardless if they regret it at the end. Okay, questions?
So if there are any questions, you can just come off mute or drop them into chat. I want to thank you both for taking this time to, I think it's always helpful to have these conversations. I think the more open and honest and respectful dialogue we have, the more we start understanding the different points of what happens as we are humans. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Also, in particular, if anybody had thoughts about the video, I know we said we'd come back to that as we kind of talked about everything in relation to that.
I think this will lead into our conversation, but there was no words, right? Like it shows that you don't have to have a lot of conversation. There's very small, simple things like a wristband or a sticker that are so powerful. So I think those are hard to legislate, right? The sticker on my personal water bottle is hard to legislate. So, but it is very powerful. So I'm excited to talk about that more. But I love that there was no words. They're just beautiful sentiment. And you just saw the relief and the safety that those small gestures provide, which I think is powerful.
I'd like to highlight that wasn't an American video, it was from Oslo, so it wasn't even in the same language as us, and we were able to understand.
Question for Jett and Tyrell. Are we, with some of the changes that you guys are kind of seeing across the country, with some of the political things that you guys have mentioned, are we seeing a change or an impact on services and resources?
Yes, yes, we are. Um, in particular, funding is a huge way to restrict access to care that is directly impacted by policy. For those of you that are directly employed or affiliated with Utah State University, you've probably noticed some changes even within the university environment because it is a public university, receives funding from both state and federal governments. The safest place that I knew when I was a student at Utah State University was called the Inclusion Center, and then it was called the Access and Diversity Center, or maybe the other way around. I don't remember. That center, to my understanding, no longer exists because of diversity, equity, and inclusion laws, which were saying this can't be funded by state stuff. Well, if it's not funded in state or federally, it ceases to exist. Our institution, Flourish Therapy, is a nonprofit organization. We could, in the past, receive grants from the state because it's like, hey, look at the underserved population that we're serving. Those funds are now inaccessible because we can't allocate government funds for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Our services, we were able to offer people free or reduced therapy, but now we have to look at other means for that. The way that policy defines certain things and then puts statute, what is the word that I'm looking at? Statutations? No, limitations? Anyways, the way that we legally define things very directly impacts things. If that answers your question, Heather.
At an individual provider level, because funding is a huge thing. I work at a private practice and we don't do grants or anything like that. This is supposed to be my slow season. I'm supposed to slow down right now. And I was expecting that. Instead, I've actually picked up quite a bit, particularly within people within the queer community seeking therapy. And so I very regularly have a wait list, and many of the people who are seeking care for me, granted, they are human, so there are a lot of aspects to them, but many of them are seeking care with me specifically for gender or sexuality related reasons and feeling unsafe to go to other providers they are not sure of their identity. I'm pretty active here in the queer community in Logan, and so people know who I am, she, they pronouns, that I'm queer. And so a lot of the time they're like, I know you were a safe person, therefore I feel safe coming to therapy with you. My practice Thrive is very good at advertising affirming care in our office, and we've received a spike in requests for us as well for that reason. So because of the policy and the negative effects that we are seeing because of that policy, individuals are needing to seek more mental health support.
Yeah, and just to kind of follow up with that, in our practice, we've also seen a spike in people who are like, well, I don't have the money to do a gender affirming care or a gender affirming surgery. And these are adults. And they'll come to us and they'll be like, I don't have the money, but I'm worried that that's not going to be an option for me in two years' time. So I need to do it now, however it looks. So there's a lot of fear because of laws and policy that is targeted at erasing identity or removing access to services. There's kind of an underlying fear of, well, if they've done this, which we didn't think was going to happen, what else will they do? So there's a lot of anxiety around what's next.
Yeah, we can all say that we're kind of nervous about what's happening next on a lot of different things, right?
Yeah.
So If nobody has any questions, I know Tyrell, you needed to jump off to a visit and we kept you over, so I really appreciate you staying on. And you can jump off at any time. I am just going to say that we're going to stay in this large breakout session. So, Leo, can I have you take notes on what we discuss? I can't see you, Leo, so give me a thumbs up.
Yeah.
Okay. And here is their information on there. And I will share out their slides after our session. We've dropped it in today's chat. But I just thought, since JC brought up the question from that video of like things that were pretty not insignificant, but small, minor things. So I just thought we could spend some time talking about this is how can we build everyday allyship into practice? So what are some things that you guys can see doing in your everyday role, or how can you help to support a more supportive environment for the LGBTQ plus community? I thought it was interesting when JC and I were having this conversation, because you guys alluded to Utah State and some of those things that are happening. And JC really talked about the sticker that he has on his own water bottle. And it just goes up on his podium as he's teaching. So Stephanie, what are your thoughts? You're on mute, so your thoughts are wonderful.
Yeah, maybe that's about as good as I'm going to get. I just think it's interesting because, as I mentioned last month, my daughter is gay and she's very open, and I love it. And but one of my grandkids one day were saying to me that he felt like it was, and I know he got this from other relatives' views. I don't know that it was his, but we were driving in the car and he's like, I think it's unacceptable that my teacher wears a pin that is a rainbow, and it shows that he supports the LGBT plus community. And I said, do you have any teachers that might wear a ring that says CTR on it? And he's like, well, yeah. And I'm like, do you feel like that's wrong? And he's like, well, no. And I said, well, tell me what the difference is. And so it was a really good communication and I said, and I told him, I'm like, well, on my desk, I have a picture of myself and your aunt in Chicago, and I'm just holding a rainbow flag. And I said, that's just my way of showing my support for your aunt and for everyone. And so it was a really good communication to talk about that. And I hope I changed his mind. He said, oh, I never thought of it that way. And I said, what do you wear that indicates what you support? And he's like, well, nothing. And I'm like, you only wear Nike shoes, or you only wear, or your sister only wears this. I said, we all do it. And that's to tell who we are and to promote our values and what we care about. And so it was a really good communication. As far as the video, once again, I loved, like what everyone said, that there was no words that needed to be spoken, but just those very simple visual aids to help people understand that they are accepted, which is sad to me to think that we have to have that to be accepted, but it does show that acceptance, and that they're in a, and that they're in a, and I don't want to say there, but people can be in a safe place.
Yeah. Yeah. Other thoughts that people have around that? Some small things that we could do.
I think like showing those physical signs of support is super important, just like even a pride sticker on a water bottle or like a pride flag in your office. But I also think like the language we use is super important as well. I think when someone introduces themselves to me with their name and their pronouns, that honestly signals to me that they're a safe space for me to also be like, hey, this is my name, these are my pronouns as well. Just kind of communicating even that first thought where it's like, hey, I'm Leo, I go by he, him. It just makes maybe a queer person or someone part of the LGBTQIA plus community a lot more comfortable coming towards me. I also think just like safe spaces can be created in so many ways, just even by showing like a tiny little flag in someone's office can just create a massive like wealth of comfort within a queer person, especially when they're going into a new place. And I always make sure that I kind of look up the businesses that I'm going to beforehand and on Google sometimes there's actually ways for them to show that they like support LGBTQIA plus people. Like I've honestly had a really hard time finding a barber here in Logan that supports LGBTQIA plus people. So I kind of just have no foregone getting a haircut in general. But yeah, I think even just like kind of just making it known that you support someone. I think there's so many small little acts that can translate into such huge action, or it can translate into something just comfortability for someone. And I think it's super important.
Yeah, those are great points. Thanks for sharing.
I wanted to add in really quick. I pulled up my hair today because I was running behind, but like flags and other things, people have a harder time legislating people's bodies. My hair's rainbow for Pride Month. It's kind of hard to see in the picture a little bit, but you can do stuff like that. And that's a very obvious signal to queer people that like, hey, I'm a safe person. I identify queer as myself, but they don't even need to know that to know that I'm a safe person because my body, my choice. I'm going to dye my hair rainbow for Pride, and people are going to know it's okay to be gay.
And I think that that's a great point. And I think that we have it for a lot of different awareness and acceptance. I think that just where you just talked about your rainbow hair color, for autism, that's the April, and people will dye their hair blue or wear blue to support that. And so I think that bringing that awareness is super helpful and understanding. Other ideas or things that people think that they can do to help support or show up for them. I always thought your words last time, Jet, where it was like start small. So that's what I've always been thinking of, like, what can I do in my little bubble of world to support the families that I'm working with as well as my coworkers. And I think having some of those conversations, but I love some of those points you guys are making, just a small sticker or a flag, or when I go to a family's house and I notice their family pictures, and it might be two moms or two dads, that I'm bring that to awareness versus not. JC, I know you might have a comment. What are your thoughts?
Are you reading minds now, Janelle?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I just everything that's been said makes a lot of sense to me. Leo, I appreciate you adding the piece about language. In my Canvas page, my official Canvas page, they haven't told me so far that I can't list my pronouns, so I do he, they. And I have had at least one student every semester approach me at some point and tell me that that made them feel safe and understood, and that was powerful, right? And all I did was go in and put he, they in my profile, and it just shows up. And if you're not looking for it, you probably don't notice it. But if you are sensitive to those things and you see it, you're going to have an immediate reaction. So yeah, I think the other piece we're going to talk about is the informal communities, right? And that's we all have these markers in the little tribes that we belong to. There's informal markers, certain things, right? We're human beings, so we code based on certain things, right? You see somebody with a Starbucks cup, you're like, they drink coffee. Well, what does that mean in our context? That means things, right? Like you see tattoos or earrings or different things. So we're all coded that way. And so it's a way to identify where we're safe or not. And I think that's how we help people build the informal connections is we figure out what the codes are And if we want to support that particular group, then we show those codes in different ways, however that might look for us. So yeah.
I love that point right there, because while I'm not a coffee drinker, I do gravitate towards more of those people that drink coffee in my world. And how, I guess for me, JC, my question would be is how can I help do some of those codes on myself to help people feel more comfortable, even though maybe I'm not in the LGBTQ plus community? Like, how can I do something small and simple, like a coffee cup or, those things?
I think there's simple things like, support queer friendly businesses, right? So
Oh, yeah.
and show up at pride events or show up at community events because people will start to see people and they'll look around and they'll notice you but there are affirming places in town and you shop there or you're just seen there, right? There's just affirming places. The coffee one's hard now because I'm like, well, go to Cafe Ibis or go to West Side, but you're not drinking coffee, then you're not going to go to those places. But show up at the farmers market and see the different booths and just be seen and visible as part of an active member of the community. I don't know. Jet's probably got better ideas than that, though.
If you hadn't brought up Cafe Ibis, I was going to bring up Cafe Ibis. So I really do. I have friends and stuff who work at Cafe Ibis. It's a very queer coffee shop. Everyone has their pronouns on their badge. If you do not like coffee, you can go across the street to Lake Croissant. That is a woman run. I believe the owner is a lesbian in particular. And so you could go over there and it's a fantastic pastry. They do a really good job there. But generally speaking, too, the other thing that I guess it doesn't really get brought up a ton outside of the queer community. But there are things that you can do. It's called flagging. These are behaviors or things or the way you wear your clothes that indicate something about you that's really big within the queer community. For a quick example, which I don't know how many people on this call would know, but carabiners are associated with lesbians in the queer community. So if you're wearing a carabiner on your like waistband, that indicates part of your identity too. So within the queer community, because we've had to stay hidden for so long, there's ways that you can communicate without saying words, if that makes sense too.
Wow. No, I did not know that. So see, that's where I think that having these conversations is really helpful for us as individuals that are looking to support the community to know those kind of things. Because I wouldn't have guessed that a carabiner would associate with that, or also that me going to what did you guys call it? Gender affirming places.
Queer
Like
affirming. Yeah.
that going there would also help support that community. So there's my new knowledge today.
Well, I think too, probably just to back it all the way up to the really, really basics, because those of us that have experience in the disability community, right? It's as simple as just be kind. Just just see the person as a person and talk whatever they want to talk. Like we used to like only do person first language in the disability community. Now it's identity. It's like, how do you want to be referred to? Do you want to be referred to as autistic, or do you want to be referred to as an autist or a person with autism? Like what do you want? Just see them as people and just be kind. That's really what you need to do. Anyway, Heather.
I was just gonna say, like, JC, I love that that's kind of where you went because my daughter who has a really significant disability, I was gonna say one of the things that I think is probably most affirming to her, that helps her feel inclusive is people's body language, eye contact and body language. I think whether you know a person's innermost, who they are or what matters to them when you walk into a place or a situation or a circumstance. That's not always something that you can see, obviously, from the outside. But inclusivity or acceptance starts with your interactions with a person, from the way that you present through body language and eye contact and those initial conversations. And I think that that's probably the most important thing that we do as human beings and as providers. And I think that one of the things that we tend to do subconsciously when we are uncomfortable or we feel like we don't really understand or we come from a place of mutual connection is we do eye aversion, or we tend to subconsciously turn our bodies away from people. And I think if we make a conscious effort not to do those things and to be more connective, those are all things that build sense of safety, they build sense of connection. And I think those are things that are really important and can give us the opportunity for open conversations. They give us the potential to learn more about each other and then to build from there. And I think that's maybe kind of that base level foundation that we go from.
Yeah, those are great points. And I think it's all true. And I love your guys' points because really, bottom line, we all want to be treated with kindness, and we all want to be included, and we all want to we all want to be accepted. And so sometimes, people are mean on all levels. Other thoughts?
I was just going to add on to what Heather was saying. I really think it's important to note the things that also could turn a person away from you. So, for example, whether we agree with this or not, and I'm not making a comment on the values part of this, but if you were to wear a shirt that says something really religious, a queer person might not initially feel safe to go up to you. It's okay if you are religious and you accept gay people. And in fact, I think I love that. I love seeing that support, right? But it's also not a reflection of you necessarily and your support in the community. It's about how that person is perceiving the situation and whether they're safe and feel comfortable with you or not. Because a person can be in the closet, you can be really out and affirming and caring, but they still aren't going to come out to you or tell you that just because that's where they are at in their journey. So there's a lot we can do as individuals. But I also just want to emphasize that if you are an ally and you are doing actions and taking care of that, that's great. It doesn't necessarily reflect on you if a queer person does or does not approach or come out to you, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on that question?
I have a comment.
Hey.
So I can't remember who said they had somebody in their family with a disability, but I have a brother with a disability, and I there's like just a lot of mental health issues in my family just in general and health problems, and it means the world to me when somebody um takes the time to say hi to us even though it might be like not be comfortable, or they research just a little bit about like what we're going through and is not afraid to like I don't know, like bring it up to us and be like, how can I support you? And like ask questions about it and be curious and help support us that way. And I don't think it's any different with this community, just like educating ourselves and like not being afraid to ask them questions and be curious and be friends and just talk. And I think it just applies to all the differences we have with other human beings in general. Just like being curious, researching, and working on those friendships and just being open and validating.
Yeah, I love that, being curious, because that's how we learn from each other, right? Is our curiosity. So I love that. So we have two other questions, but we are just at time. So I would hate to keep you guys over your time. I love this discussion. Please, if you have any thoughts, add it to our discussion on Facebook, because I think that's what really helps keep those conversations going, especially as we're navigating some of these trying times in our political realm. So I appreciate all the discussions, and it's been super helpful for me. So I hope that everybody else has had that experience as well. We will be taking July off, and then our next network will start in August. So enjoy July in the summer heat. I hope everybody is enjoying that. That is my identity, as a summer lover. So I just can't soak it up enough. And thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.